This video might make you look at your phone differently. Not because I'm going to tell you to throw it away. I use a phone, you use a phone. That's not the point. The point is this. What if your phone is not just changing what you do, but changing what you can bear? Boredom, waiting, silence, uncertainty, loneliness, not being seen. These form the raw material of our personality structure. I'm Dr. Sanil Rege, consultant psychiatrist and founder of Psychiatry. I've trained over 10,000 mental health professionals in psychiatry, psychopharmacology, and clinical reasoning. And in clinical practice, I'm increasingly seeing how scrolling affects attention, mood, sleep, and emotional regulation. So in this video, I want to go beyond the usual screen time is bad conversation and look at the loop underneath it. Stimulation, discomfort, avoidance, reward, and repetition. So a more interesting question is not whether phones distract us. We know they do. The deeper question is whether they are reshaping the conditions through which personality develops. And this question, of course, becomes even more important in young adults, where identity, trust, intimacy, emotional regulation, and self-worth are still developing and consolidating. I'm not talking about dopamine detox. It's really about the self. What kind of person does your phone make easier for you to become? You see, human beings are bundles of habits. They're shaped by repetition. What we repeat becomes easier. What becomes easier becomes automatic. And what becomes automatic forms a part of a personality structure. So in this video, I want to explore what happens when a device enters personality development early, often, and intimately. Hundreds of times a day. At the exact moments where the self is supposed to practice something important. Waiting, wondering, mind-wandering, feeling, imagining, trusting, regulating, and tolerating not knowing. Tolerating uncertainty. And this, of course, matters most during emerging adulthood, roughly from 18 to 25, when identity, relationships, emotional regulation, autonomy, sexuality, ambition, loneliness, and self-worth are being organized. So let's start off with understanding personality. You see, personality is not fixed. It's organized. It's not just who you are. Personality is best thought of as a pattern. And we all have a pattern of perceiving, anticipating, feeling, relating, and acting. In simple terms, it's your style of meeting the world, the environment that you live in. And that style does not appear out of nowhere. It was built through a process. Yes, genetics, attachment, stress, relationships, culture matters. But repeated experience forms the most important aspects of personality formation. Let me explain what I mean by that. You see, from very early in life, the brain is constantly making predictions. Why? Because it's a predictive organ. The brain evolved to match prediction with outcome. For example, what does this object do? Is this person safe? What happens when I'm upset? If I wait, will someone come? If I make a mistake, will I be shamed? If I'm bored, can I generate something from within, or do I need the world to stimulate me? Over time, these answers or solutions become embodied. They become core expectations, also known as core predictions. They become emotional reflexes. They become relational habits, outside conscious awareness, and eventually they begin to look like personality. Now, neurobiologically, this involves many circuits, but one broad way to understand it is through the relationship between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. The limbic system includes structures, the deeper structures like the amygdala, hippocampus, ventral striatum, and the broader salience networks. This system is involved in emotional tagging. What's important for the brain? What should I pay attention to? It's involved in reward, novelty, threat, memory, and motivation. Whilst the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, helps with reflection, inhibition, planning, sequencing, error detection, error monitoring, decision-making, delay, and perspective-taking. We often think that maturity is the limbic system, the primitive part of the brain, as often conceptualized being switched off. But that's not accurate, because that would make us robots. Maturity is the development of a better relationship between emotional urgency and reflective control. In other words, an optimal balance between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine a cue or a stimulus appears. The limbic system says, this matters. The prefrontal cortex helps to ask, does it really matter? Do I need to act on it now? What else could this mean? Can I wait? You can see this example applies to conditions like ADHD, where a stimulus such as a video game may matter a lot more than completing maths homework. It applies to addiction, where the cue, such as a bottle, can trigger off cravings and seeking out alcohol, compared to meeting friends, for example, and engaging in other activity. That gap between impulse and action is where a lot of personality develops. And that gap is exactly where the phone is now being placed. This gap becomes especially important in emerging childhood, the age range of 18 to 25. And of course, if we backtrack even further for children, this becomes a crucial part. Let's touch on 18 to 25. This is a phase of exploration, new relationships, sexual identity, career uncertainty, leaving home, financial pressure, friendship transitions, romantic disappointments, comparison of status, questions of belonging, lots of different aspects to work through. It's a period of opportunity and possibility, but also a period of vulnerability. And now imagine into this developmental window comes the smartphone. Rapidly. So aspects of communication, dating, friendship, comparison, reassurance, exclusion, performance, belonging, identity have all been reorganized. And if we think of it, this has happened really rapidly, say maybe over a decade or so. Most conversations about phones focus on time. How many hours, how many minutes, or what's the screen time report? But time's only part of the story. The deeper issue is function. What function is the phone serving for the person? Because phone can act as an object of emotional regulation. It can help the individual regulate their internal state. If they're bored, they can scroll. If they're lonely, check messages. If you're uncertain, search. Unsettled, watch something. You're anxious about a reply, refresh screen. You're feeling excluded, monitor. This is why the phone matters psychologically. It's not just grabbing attention, it's now taking over regulation. Now, that does not mean it's always bad. The phone can genuinely connect us. It allows intimacy across distances. It lets us connect with family. It helps people find communities they could never find offline. For socially anxious or isolated people, online connection can be an important bridge to belonging. So I'm not trying to take an anti-phone approach. What I'm trying to highlight is that if the phone becomes the automatic solution to every uncomfortable internal state, then things start shifting. The brains learn that when feelings such as loneliness, boredom, anxiety, shame, uncertainty occur, it can be interrupted. Interrupted by what the phone can provide. So over time, the brain learns, I don't really need to stay with the feeling. I can move outward and seek stimulation with the phone. That is a very different developmental lesson. So let's think about what the phone trains. A smartphone is a highly efficient learning device. Provides novelty, intermittent rewards, social cues, alerts, potential relevance, potential threats, inclusion, exclusion. That combination is very powerful. The phone repeatedly trains a very specific reflex. Check now, resolve now. We don't need to sit in the gap. We don't need to sit with uncertainty. We don't need to wait for the mind to organize. So the repeated solution to inner discomfort becomes external engagement. And that shifts the balance of that person. Less waiting, less self-generated thought, less tolerance for internal uncertainty, more checking, more scanning. Now this takes us to the important concept of boredom. Boredom matters more than most people realize. Boredom's often misunderstood. People often think of boredom as wasted time. It isn't. Boredom is developmental pressure. It pushes the mind to generate. It essentially activates the default mode network, an important network necessary for the creation of identity. This network's internally focused. It's responsible for creativity, mind-wandering, interest, fantasy, curiosity, reflection, play. Involves the default mode network. So if every flicker of boredom is solved immediately, that internal generation gets interrupted. And you can imagine how crucial this is for children and adolescents. What happens here is that we need the world to do more of the work for you. We need more stimulation, more novelty, more speed. The individual's now organized around the prediction that stillness is bad or irritating. Reading feels harder. Thinking feels effortful. Even one task focus begins to feel underpowered, simply because the ability to stay with low stimulation states is becoming difficult. Besides boredom, the phone does something else. It changes your relationship with uncertainty. This is one of the deepest parts of the issue. You see, when we think about psychological health or the word resilience, this does not equate to strength. Resilience is about tolerating uncertainty. Let's think of some examples. You send a message and you're okay waiting. You can read a message and you're okay wondering what they meant. You're mentalizing. You can not know what is happening elsewhere, what your friend's doing. You can sit with incomplete information. You can make decisions with enough information. Think about what phones do here. You can check immediately, get an answer immediately, distract when you want, reassure immediately. What's concerning here is that the phone can be really deceptive. We think it provides certainty through searching and Googling, for example, for the answer, but the phone's creating another type of uncertainty. Why have they not replied? What am I missing? What's happening without me? How am I being perceived? So the phone does two things at once. It increases uncertainty, then offers instant relief from uncertainty. That loop is psychologically powerful. In fact, it forms the basis of addictive behavior. Because if a mind repeatedly escapes uncertainty rather than carrying it or tolerating it, it becomes less comfortable with not knowing. And this intolerance of uncertainty shapes the personality. It makes people more vigilant, more anxious, more reassurance-seeking, more reactive, and more externally anchored. So we've seen how phone interferes with sitting with our internal states, how it changes our relationship with uncertainty, but it also changes the meaning of relationships. Personality develops in the context of relationships, not just in what others do. If everyone is always reachable, silence starts to feel uncomfortable. Everyone is visible. Responses can be tracked. You see likes, views, replies, and each of these have a meaning. They pull the self towards monitoring, towards comparison, towards social vigilance, towards external measures of worth. And over time, that can organize a person differently. So the individual becomes more dependent on responses, more performative in identity, sort of creating a mask, less private internally. The paradox here is that you can be constantly connected, but still internally be disconnected. This is one of the biggest paradoxes of the phone-mediated life. Now, why does all of this matter even more in children? For adults, phones can shape habits. For children, they shape development. That's a much bigger issue. Because childhood is when boredom tolerance, frustration tolerance, emotional regulation, play, imagination, and relational security are still being built. If a device repeatedly enters into crucial moments of development, certain aspects may not fully develop, such as free play, embodied exploration, delayed gratification, internal fantasy, the ability to sit with one's own mind. So the concern isn't just screen exposure, it's developmental displacement. In other words, what is not happening because the phone is always there, because the phone is now acting as a substitute. That's the more important question. There is a concept known as nomophobia, the fear or distress of being without the phone. And it's clinically interesting because it's not just, I like my phone. It reflects a deeper dependence on the device as a regulator of uncertainty, connection, and safety. For the young person, younger adults between 18 to 25, the online self becomes a kind of social avatar. A version of the person that can be curated, intensified, protected, exaggerated, or even experimented with. That can be liberating for many individuals. For some people, the online self allows expression that was inhibited offline. For example, a shy person may find a voice. A marginalized person may find community. A creative person may find an audience. So once again, the story isn't just negative. But the social avatar can also start feeding back into the offline self. The person shapes the image, then the image shapes the person. Offline identity moves online. Online identity comes back offline. And in that loop, certain psychological forces can become amplified. Grandiosity, narcissism, impulsivity, regression, disinhibition. Darker expressions of self, dissociation from consequence. Not in everyone, but the medium makes these shifts easier. And how does phone interact with emotional pain? This to me is the deeper clinical question. What does the phone teach people to do with emotional pain? Because a developing mind needs opportunities to feel something and then understand it. Loneliness, for example, has to become symbolized as language. Boredom has to become imagination. Anxiety has to become reflection. Shame has to become perspective. Uncertainty has to become tolerance. That's how the prefrontal cortex slowly helps the limbic system, not by suppressing emotion, but by giving it context. Here's a video on why suppressing emotions is not psychologically healthy. But the issue is if every uncomfortable state is immediately interrupted by the phone, then emotional life may become less processed. This does not mean that the individual becomes less emotional. They simply become more reactive because the emotion is not understood well enough. And after years of this, people may say something like, I don't know what I feel. I can't sit with myself. I feel lonely even when I'm connected. I feel empty within. More connection does not always mean more intimacy. This is one of the great paradoxes of modern life. We're more contactable than ever. Messages, stories, likes, comments, voice notes, group chats, photographs. Yet, many people feel extremely lonely. Why? Because contact is not the same as intimacy. Intimacy requires a lot more attention, timing, trust, awkwardness, the willingness and being comfortable with the way we are in the company of the other individual. It's a slow process of being known by the other person. A phone can support that, but it can't substitute for that. A message from a close friend can be soothing, but the same device can also replace intimacy with social noise, with little depth, little containment. So let's return to the original question. Has your phone changed your personality? I would answer this carefully. Your phone probably has not created a completely new personality. That is too simplistic, but it may have shaped the thresholds through which your personality is expressed. How much boredom can you tolerate? How quickly do you need reassurance? How strongly do you react to uncertainty? How much do you compare yourself to others? How easily do you sit with loneliness? How much of your identity depends on being seen? And during emerging adulthood, when identity, intimacy, autonomy, and emotional regulation are still developing and consolidating, those repeated patterns matter. In children, they can have an even greater impact. So you're probably asking me, Sanil, what do we do with all of this? The answer is not going to be a dopamine detox. We can't pretend that we can return to a world before smartphones. The question is more practical, and so is the solution. So the first step is to start asking ourselves some basic questions. Can we wait without checking? Can we feel bored without escaping through the phone? Can we sit with ourselves without automatically feeling lonely and needing to connect through the phone? Can we sit with uncertainty? That's the important work. So there's one thing to remember from this video, it's this. Your phone supports connection, but the same phone can fragment your internal self. And to answer that, We need to understand what it's trained us to no longer tolerate. Boredom, silence, waiting, uncertainty, loneliness, being unseen. Your phone may not just be wasting your time. It may be shaping what kind of self becomes easier to live inside. I'm Dr. Sanil Rege, and you're watching the Dr. Rege channel. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also consider joining the membership. That can support our channel and help me bring you a lot more videos. Members get early release of videos where I can address your comments as a priority. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, stay curious. Bye-bye.